Welcome to the future. Get ready to explore how spirituality and science will come together in the age of Aquarius. Hosted by Jacy Nova.
Today on the show, I have Schildkret, inspiring artist and author behind the International Morning Altars movement, who has inspired tens of thousands of people across the globe to heal and connect with nature, art, and ritual. We talk about his new book, Hello, Goodbye, and how to embrace the power of ritual with simple practices that slow us down to honor and mark the real moments in our lives. Life has many transitions. A baby is born, a child leaves for college, a marriage, a divorce, a death. We all experience moments of profound change, but what do we do to mark these moments? In our conversation, Day helps us find some of those answers. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the future. I'm Jacy Nova, and this is the Age of Aquarius podcast. Today on the show, we have Day Schildkret. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
So I'm going to dive right in. When did you first discover the healing power of art and nature?
I was 5 years old is my first memory. I have a story I tell quite often of, being the little boy who, after rainstorms on my front driveway, I would save worms and I'd help them get onto little leaves and I'd escort them back to the front lawn. I'd puncture little holes in the ground and I'd help them find their way back home. And that wasn't enough for my 5-year-old self. I actually decorated every single wormhole with little berries and twigs and just made them beautiful. And basically, that was my first memory of discovering art and healing and nature. And what's really crazy is, 30 years later, this has become a career, essentially, of teaching people around the world how to create altars out of nature and find their way back home, find their own way back home, find their own way of belonging back to their lives or back to the earth. And it's such a wild thing to be a little kid and kind of intuitively feel what was right for me. And then to actually have been cognizant enough as an adult to follow that path.
And how did that help you evolve as a child growing up and really using art to turn it into a career?
As a child, it was basically just something I did. My parents thought it was, cute and weird. But it wasn't until about 11 years ago. And it's interesting you're talking to me today. It was literally 11 years ago yesterday. My father died. And it was the same year I went through a pretty big breakup. And so I was really just with a lot of grief that year. And I had a dog at the time, and her and I would go on these long walks in the hills. I was in Northern California, and I was in my head, as you are when you're grieving, just kind of like going through thoughts about, how it was and what is, and, longings and all of these things, heartbroken thoughts. And my head was down. Rudy, my dog, my miniature schnauzer, was, sniffing and excited and curious. And my head was down. And along the way, I'd find these beautiful bits of nature, leaves and berries and bark and whatnot. And I just continue on my way, just, with my head down, just in my thoughts. And one morning we found our way to this amazing tree, this eucalyptus tree in the park. And underneath that tree, I saw these gorgeous amber colored mushrooms that were growing under the tree. And I was so compelled. I sat down and I kind of did the thing I did when I was 5. I started to take the mushrooms and the bark and eucalyptus caps and all of these things, and I put them into some symmetrical order. I made art essentially out of them. And an hour went by like it was a minute. And for the first time in like 7 months, it felt like my grief wasn't burdening me totally down. I felt lighter for the first time. And so I made a commitment to return to that spot for 30 days and to keep finding material to make what I've called morning altars with. And basically that time came and went, and I haven't stopped. It's been 11 years now. And this has become something that has rippled out into the world. And there's tens of thousands of people who are now doing it in the places that they live for the reasons of their own lives. Someone's born, someone dies, someone gets a new job, someone moves. And they're making these earth altars out of the very places they live. And then they send them to me on social media. And it's been a remarkable experience to watch something that was just, a childlike thing I did, just with a lot of wonder and sweetness and curiosity. And it's become something that is now, I'm teaching 100 people in 5 continents how to essentially bring this back to their communities in a teacher training that I'm doing. And it's really wild to see this thing ripple out into the world and essentially help people so profoundly and connect them back to the earth, connect them back to their innate creativity, connect them back to the sense of impermanence in the world, and to connect them back to more life and more beauty. I feel like especially these days, we need that. We so need that.
I totally agree. I know that you've taught teenagers and mentored them to connect with their spirituality with a deeper nature connection. What are some of your programs and how did you do this?
It's great that you asked that. I think the most important one is a class I taught for 12 years, and it was what we called the Fire Circle. And it was once a week in the evening. I would gather about 25 to 30 teenagers around a fire. And it would be a ritual. We'd light the fire in a certain way. We'd have a certain way of speaking where people would affirm each other. And each week I would bring a topic that they're wondering about in their lives, but they're not talking about in their home and they're not talking about at school. For instance, why am I so angry all the time? Or why are my friends all on pharmaceuticals? Or what does it mean to fall in love? Like these kinds of topics. And essentially, they would be outside under the starry sky with a crackling fire, surrounded by their peers and a mentor, me. And they just, first off, craved it. They were hungry for this kind of connection, this kind of ritual. And then even more so, they were getting something that in none of their lives they would get, which is witnessing, which is reflection, which is meaning making, all of these things, and also in the presence of a mentor. And so, I did this for 12 years. This was, years ago. I don't do it anymore, but they're now in their 20s. I mean, I get, people emailing and calling me from years later, just saying how much it's still impacted their lives. And so that class really inspired one of the chapters in my new book, Hello, Goodbye, on rituals for puberty. And out of all of the chapters I wrote for this new book, that's one of the ones I'm the most proud of.
Do you feel like today, because of social media and teenagers spending more time, chatting versus maybe talking in real life has made them more disconnected?
I mean, I think that is the consequence and not the root problem. It's the disconnection is all around us. They are on the receiving end of disconnection. They're swimming in its water. So are we. I mean, we have an abundance of technology, but an overwhelming abundance of disconnection. I mean, it's kind of remarkable to witness kind of the paradox. We have so much ways of communicating, and yet feelings of isolation and depression abound us, So we are literally on the verge of forgetting who we are as humans and why we're here. And my work, my life, my career puts itself, with many other people, puts itself right at the edge of standing in the face of that and saying, we have to remember who we are. We have to find our way back to our humanity. We have to remember the ways that our ancestors did it. And we have to remember our earth connection. We have to fall in love with the world again. And, I'm not anti-technology at all. I mean, thank God you and I are talking on technology. I mean, I'm right now developing a lot of interesting ritual spaces in VR. I mean, I want to access the people in technology, but we can't just live in that space. We have to find our way back to our humanity. And to me, The three pillars that I work with consistently to do that is nature, art, and ritual. Those are the three levers I work with. Those are my three guides. Those are my three goddesses. I mean, that is how I help people. Sometimes individually, we just do art or we just work with nature or ritual, and sometimes all together. And when they're all together, it is like a powerhouse of helping people find their way back to a sense of belonging and connection and healing and inspiration and all the juicy things. I mean, that's how I found my way back. So I'm there helping people.
Can you tell me more about your new book, Hello, Goodbye, and what readers can expect to learn from it?
Sure. I mean, first off, I can't even believe this book wasn't written before I wrote it. I mean, it is a ritual recipe book. It's hard to believe that this didn't exist. You know, we have so many moments in our lives where life changes. For instance, a birth, a death, a divorce, losing a friend, losing a pet, graduating. I mean, you know, coming out of the closet, whatever moments, waking up in the morning, going to bed at night. These are moments of change. Sometimes they're losses, sometimes they're celebrations, but they all are moments where life changes. They're called threshold moments. They're moments where we literally walk through a passage and we're no longer the person that we were, or we're no longer in the relationship that we were in, or we're no longer in the job that we had, or we're no longer in the home that we were living in. And we're in this new life, this new identity, this new relationship, this new job, whatever it is. But the culture that we live in is basically like, it doesn't matter, keep going. That's the culture. It's only concerned with growth. It's got a short attention span. It doesn't like slowing down. And yet rituals position themselves at these moments of change, at the threshold moments. And they say, actually, you have to slow down. You have to slow down and do something to mark the change. If you don't do that, your psyche has no idea what's going on. And you're in a new reality, but you're living as if you're in the old reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think ritual is really important. I wanted to share a story with you that had to do with ritual. I shared earlier with you that I'm from Oregon, and my stepfather passed in May of 2020 in the height of the pandemic. And my mom had already passed on, and he had stage 4 cancer, and there were so many hospitals that had COVID patients. So I was able to find him a place in Mount Angel in Oregon. And it was actually used to be a convent run by nuns. And so I got to spend the last 2 weeks of his life with him there, and arranged for his sister to call him every day and talk about things they used to do when he was a child. They used to go surfing in Huntington Beach and all the things that were really special and important to him. He had been a Marine in the Vietnam War, so he had had a lot of veterans have a lot of pain, you know, for what they saw. So we got to spend a lot of time talking about it. My mom had already passed on, so the nurses, the doctors, the nuns really helped me in the process of his death to celebrate his life. And they have a ritual that when a patient passes and he was picked up to be taken to the funeral home, all the nurses and the doctors gather by the front door and they stand side by side and they thank him, you know, as he leaves, for allowing them the honor and the privilege to share his last moments with them. And I got to walk behind him, and it was such a beautiful ritual that really made such a difference for me, and I'm sure for him as well, that he was honored in the last moments of his life. And I thought that was such an amazing ritual that they do every day when someone passes on. And I know for all the other families, I thought it was really beautiful and helpful during that time frame. And I had thought of you before we were talking, that I wanted to share that with you about that ritual that I know other hospitals don't do, but I know this one was quite meaningful to me.
They may or may not say this, but they're doing it for the family. They're doing it for the recently deceased, and they're also doing it for themselves because they encounter so much death and dying that they need also to mark those moments so that they can continue to operate. If we don't mark it, we get almost like psychic clutter. The rituals help to, through reflection, through symbolic action, through meaning, they help to keep our psychic space clear. It literally metabolizes it. So they're doing that also to mark the moment for themselves too. It's for everyone. And by the way, like, I'm thinking of another hospital ritual right now that I wrote about in the book, where I interviewed like 250 people for this book. One of them was a mother whose 2-year-old daughter had leukemia. They were in the hospital for like 2 years fighting it. This is a popular ritual that some hospitals do. On the day that she essentially got discharged and was cancer-free, they had a survivor bell that they ring. And the daughter rung the bell. And the mother told me that she was, in that moment, she was actually like, she experienced a lot of joy and a lot of sorrow. And she was thinking about all the kids that didn't get a chance to ring that bell. But the bell itself, the ringing of the bell, is the marker that basically says something happened, right? Like, you've been here, your reality has been consumed by this cancer, and now you're going to have a completely different reality. You're ringing this bell to say that reality is no longer the reality that you're heading into. So rituals at their core, they mark distinctions. They distinguish what was from what is. And the survivor bell, or in your case, them lining up and giving thanks, those are markers of distinction that basically say, this is no longer what was. This is something different now.
Sometimes people avoid what they fear. They don't want to talk about loss. And I think it's important to remember it's something we're all going to experience at some point in time in our life, some more than others. For me, it helped me not be afraid of death and try to see the beauty in it, and knowing that my dad was going to a better place. And one other thing that one of the nuns shared with me, which I thought was so fascinating, is she said in hospice, many times people on their deathbed are visited by more than one or two people. Sometimes it's a family member that's passed on. It could be, someone they refer to as an angel, or just individuals. And they always let the nurses or the nuns know their travel date, the day they're departing. For my father, he talked about there was a man and a young girl that had told him to pack his bags because he was leaving on Thursday. And he just wanted to let me know that is the day that he passed. And I just found it so fascinating. But because they were so open about talking about it, and because they had rituals, and it was something that we could remember, it's a bittersweet moment, I guess. I found that really incredibly beautiful. And it made me think about, okay, how can we continue to remember, and why your book really resonated with me about the rituals.
Before you move on, I just want to say something, if you don't mind, which is
No.
you use the word remember. I start this entire book. I mean, the introduction of my book is a very tender moment that I had with my mom last year, which is my mom has dementia. And there was a day during the pandemic. I mean, people like my mom got hit really hard during the pandemic. And, the isolation just really wreaked havoc. And so there was a moment last year where she forgot my name for the first time. And that's how I started the book, the introduction of the book, which is, what do you do when your mom forgets your name? Like, do you just carry on with your day as if it's like a normal day? Or like how do you deal with that, And because it was really, I'm a ritualist, and that was a really hard one for me. I mean, I look to my own culture. I come from a Jewish culture, and there was nothing there, and I look to like all of my experience with ritual, and there was nothing there. And so, I'm basically like, what do you do? So the introduction of the book is like what I did. which is, I mean, I'm not going to reveal it. It's a really interesting read, but the whole introduction is based on the word remember, because my mom is losing her memory. The second part of the introduction is basically saying, if it's possible for a person to lose their memory, is it possible for a culture to lose its memory? And so I talk a lot about, did any of us grow up with rituals in this culture? Like, why are we all so ritual deficient? And what's the cost of that? The point I want to make about memory is that I'm a word nerd, by the way. And in the book, I love playing around with words. And I also really, really love etymology, which is basically the roots of words. Words travel through time and they change just like people do. And so the word remember has basically two signs in it. The first one is the word which basically, with a lot of different words, it means to do again, right? Like return. And the second word is member, which is a verb. And we don't really use that word anymore in our culture, to member, but it really means to make whole. But if the word is in front of it, it basically means you forgot. Because the only way you can remember is if you forgot, right? So forgetting is so human. It's just normal. We all forget all of the time, right? Some of it's extreme, like what my mom was doing, but like some of it's just like, oh, I forgot to pick you up from school, or I forgot your number, or I forgot whatever. It is the forgetting, which is the impetus to do the ritual. It's the trigger. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to forget. Therefore, we have rituals to help us remember. I don't know if you read the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, but she writes this beautiful sentence in the book, which says, and she's an indigenous woman and a scientist. She basically says, our elders teach us that our ceremonies are our ways to remember. And I love that. It's basically, they have mechanisms in their culture, rituals and ceremonies, that help the people remember, because forgetting is inevitable. And so that's basically the structure of my book, is like these moments when your life changes, like let's say you lose your dog. That is a moment to remember. The question is, what are you supposed to remember? That totally depends on the situation and the ritual and all of that stuff. But these are moments when life changes. We have rituals to help us remember who we are, to remember where we're going, to remember what we love, all of these things. So you're really nailing it on the head when you mention the word remember. It's like the whole thing is based on that.
Part of it too is, and I think it's such a collective experience that we all went through together with the pandemic, and having to travel during that period of time and walk through the airport when it's empty and fly on a plane with only 3 people there. And for me, the ritual of, I wouldn't say my stepfather was a very religious man, but I am, I believe in God. I'm not Catholic, but I felt comfort in knowing that he would be at this specific location, that he would be treated well. But it was also very eerie because he was one of the few patients on the floor as well. So there was a sense of stillness. There was rituals that they had every day, that it was like a process, a grieving process that they took both him and myself through, to the point of when they kind of sensed when he would be passing, when he shared that story with me of when he would be traveling. And they asked me if he talked to me about that, to let them know. And so they were kind of prepared. It is a special moment for me to remember, because not many people get the time to spend that much time with someone they love.
What is the day he died?
I think it was like May 10th of 2020.
I'm asking because yesterday was my dad's death anniversary. I wrote a chapter in the book on death anniversaries. Like, what do you do when it's a year later or 5 years later or whatever? Any anniversary in the year is an opportunity to remember. To remember your marriage, or to remember like a birthday, or to remember, the anniversary of, like, for some nations, like, liberation or whatever. But for your and my father, like, yesterday was an opportunity for me to remember him. So you want to know what I did? Our ritual on my dad's birthday, I mean, one of them comes from my culture, which is we light a 24-hour candle and we say a prayer. But the ritual that I do with my dad, and my brother does it too now, is that we go to the local pizza place, and we order a pie. And I take a little sliver of the pizza pie. I have an altar at home, and I give him a slice because my father loved pizza. And eating pizza on the day he died is an opportunity for me to remember what he loved. And that's like, there's tens of thousands of these moments in our lives where we can like remember what's important, remember who's important, and to remember like, in the crazy rush of our lives and schedules and emails and technology and speed and all of these things and making money, and we're forgetting what's important. To me on February 27th, what's important is my dad. So no matter what I'm doing, it's a pizza ritual, and like, sorry, like everyone else, like you come second on that day, like what's important is my father. And so that is the heart and soul of the book, is like these threshold moments help us remember what's important. We need that these days, especially as the rate of change is accelerating so fast.
I think too, it helps us stay connected on an emotional level, because I talked earlier about being disconnected. There is, when you're online all the time, and from a social media perspective, sometimes we can become very robotic in the way we do things. And there can be a lack of empathy when we're connecting with others. And what I've found with some people, not everybody feels comfortable sharing what's going on in their life. And I always suggest to my friends and people that I work with, like you never really know what's going on with someone. So to be extra kind or empathetic, or, be willing to listen to what they want to talk about, no matter how small or big it might be. And I really like what you're saying about remembering the rituals, that it to me, it helps you feel connected. And that's a special moment that you can carry with you. I think it's just really, really beautiful. The chapter that you wrote about global and national crisis, it makes me think about the crisis in Ukraine. And I've been watching on social media and on the news and YouTube, and how President Zelensky has really brought the world together, when I think there was a moment that it really shifted when they said they would send a plane for him and his family to take him out of danger. And he said, no, I'm staying. I'm staying here with my people. And that seemed to kind of help them have the strength to do their best and to protect their country and their families and the people they love. But it feels like he's really motivated the rest of the world. And maybe you can talk about that a little bit more.
My heart's broken just with what's happening there. I mean, I have family. My first cousin's wife is Ukrainian. And also I've been to Ukraine a variety of times, and I've done a variety of Jewish rituals throughout Ukraine, and have brought medicine and food to housebound and elderly people there. So I have had some time in Ukraine, and have experienced both the beauty and the pride and the humanity that's there. And also I've really been on the receiving end of stories of how people were scared. I mean, like for years. And so I'm watching from afar right now a country that also my ancestors lived in, and and so there's a sense of connection, and there's a sense of fear about what's happening, and also hope, and all of these things. And I mean, it's interesting that you pointed to that chapter in my book, because the whole thing is basically centered around this word crisis. As I said before, like I'm a word nerd. So, the etymology of the word crisis doesn't mean catastrophe or cataclysm. It actually comes from the Proto-Indo-European word cry, which means to sieve or distinguish. This is really interesting. Like we need to learn this. Like I want to just like offer this to your listeners and to you, because like I think this is such a clue as to how to deal with a crisis. It's basically, the word itself is saying we have to discern how this time is different than any other time. This is not a normal time. So we have to become like a faithful witness to that. I think that especially, for instance, with the pandemic, like there was a lot, especially at the beginning, like, and now too, like there's a lot of craving for normalcy, but a crisis is basically saying to you, this isn't normal. This is different, and it doesn't mean it's bad or good. It just means something different is happening. And so that is very in alignment with the purpose of a ritual, which is basically saying also, this time is different than other times. And so by doing rituals during a crisis, and of course, if there's like, I think if there's like immediate harm, like it's not the time to do a ritual, but like once things have slightly settled, to be able to distinguish, how has this changed my life? What is different now? What have I lost? What have I gained? Who are my friends? Who are not? Who have fallen away? Where am I right now? I mean, all of these things that a crisis can bring. There's, for instance, like tons of people in Ukraine who are fleeing right now. Their lives, I've been listening to stories all the last couple of days. Like, people's lives are completely turning upside down. This is exactly what happened to my ancestors 4 generations ago. They did I'm on the other end of that experience. Like I'm 3 generations on the other end of what they experience. And so people going through that right now are experiencing this life-changing, highly unfortunate situation. And so the ritual in the book, I actually called it the broken whole bowl ritual. And essentially the ritual is in 3 parts. You take a bowl and you break it, preferably like a nice bowl, and you break it. And on each shard, you're basically writing with a marker or something, how has this crisis broken you? What have you lost? What changed? What's different? So that's the first part. The second part is taking the shards of the bowl and putting them someplace special in your house, like on an altar or on a mantle place, and just letting that be there. Not trying to change it, but just being aware, like there's been loss here. Shit has changed. I did not, it's like during the pandemic, so much changed. I mean, at the beginning, like I lost like 95% of my income. That's a lot, And so like my friends, like they were supposed to get married. They had to postpone their wedding. Like, I mean, people had to move, like so much change. So it's allowing those broken shards to be there and to not turn away from them, but to in some ways sanctify them. Like this is a big moment. This is not a normal moment. This is a big moment. And then the third part of the ritual is to glue them back together. And this is inspired by the Japanese kintsugi ritual, which is basically when a bowl breaks, you take gold or silver and you glue it back together and you accentuate the cracks in beauty and value. And the ritual is basically saying, this isn't bad. This is defining. This is what makes your life valuable. And so the third part of the ritual is the gluing back of the bowl and the reflection on what has this crisis given you and how can you heal from this crisis. And then you have what I call a ritual bowl, which is a bowl that's been symbolic of your journey. And so the war in Ukraine will not be the last time there is a national or global crisis, unfortunately. And yet, we need more things to do so that we can process what's happened or what is happening. And so that is my offering in this book of, breaking a bowl, sitting with the shards and gluing it back together and really allowing there to be healing.
What's happening now as I talk with friends and stuff, and I lived in Sweden for several years and talking with friends there, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier about remembering we're awake now We're all remembering what's important to us. What do we value? Do we value peace over war? Do we value human life over material things? And really getting back to basics of humanity, in my opinion. It feels like a huge energy shift. And I find it fascinating that the President Zelensky and Putin is trying to do propaganda that he's a Nazi when actually he's Jewish and his family escaped the Holocaust.
And escaped Soviet, they were Soviet Jews. My whole childhood was devoted to, as an American Jew, this is like something we did, which was like we sponsored a lot of fundraisers to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union in the 80s. And so a lot of my memory of growing up was devoted to that. And so they were a family of Soviet Jews who left Soviet Union and went to Ukraine in order to escape, basically the fate of being Jewish. So when Putin says that, it's such propaganda. Thankfully, many of us are able to see right through it, but it doesn't make any sense, and it's actually quite remarkable that Ukraine is being led by a Jewish comic at that, by the way.
I just really admire him, his strength, his authenticity, his love for his family and for his people.
His eloquence. He's very well spoken.
And I think it also gave people like, oh, wow, this is real leadership. It's not just rhetoric and talking points. It's like you really go in there and get it done. And today, just before our interview, I read that, he asked the EU to accept Ukraine as part of the European Union, urging them. And in a way, putting them on the spot, which is like, okay, my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, and every day I'm following it and I'm sending my thoughts, my prayers, positive energy, and just so hopeful that they can get through this, but also a lot of admiration for the president. It helps me remember what's important.
Yeah, for sure. There's actually like a paragraph I want to read that kind of broadens our conversation into just like crises in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It says, these crisis thresholds define our generations. We must mark them because we have been marked by them. The challenge, though, of defining these crises that have so inexorably defined our collective lives is that it requires us to put aside our impulse to fix, futz, and figure out, and let the brokenness be. We must listen, learn, and be changed from the brokenness of our days. We must slow down long enough to sense the wisdom in not knowing and value the way that a time of collective struggle humbles us. Perhaps there is something of enormous worth discoverable only here and now that we can't access during those normal times. Maybe these times offer us generational gifts and a purpose that can change a world so desperately needing change. I wanted to read that because I feel like and it's normal to want to return back to normal all the time. And it's scary when we're in a crisis. But I read that because I also want to say, like, crisis moments, whether it's in Ukraine right now or the pandemic or, it's a financial collapse or an election or whatever we are collectively going through, to see them as generational gifts and to turn towards and not away from what's happening. There's an African author by the name of Bayo Akomolafe, and he coined a phrase that I use all the time. I freaking love it. And he plays on the word witness, and he calls it witnessing, to stay with what's happening, to not turn away from it, but to stay with the trouble. And that's the sign of a good witness, like on a personal level, like a friend who's just, let's say you're going through like a miscarriage, a friend that holds your hand and is like, I'm with you. I know this is painful. I know this is life-changing. I know this is big. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to walk through this threshold together. And that to me is what a good witness is it stays with what's happening. And to me, these moments of crisis, global or national or individual, they really ask more from us. They ask us to not turn away. They ask us to turn towards, and they ask us to see these moments as with gifts, not totally void of gifts. And I feel like that is how we can continue to find our way back to being human, is like, we have a generational objective right now. And the objective is to locate what are the gifts of our generation? What are we being asked to learn? And to me, one of the ways towards those gifts is ritual, because we can't do it, while we're like living our normal lives. We have to somehow elevate these times that we're living in and look towards them and wonder about them and make beauty from them and then find our gifts. I mean, I was telling you about that at the beginning, like, morning altars, my art and teaching practice basically came from a time of grief, right? Like, it wouldn't have come if my dad didn't die. I was super gifted. I was gifted this amazing gift from a time of personal crisis. If he was alive, I probably would have a totally different career. You and I would not be talking on this podcast. So, these moments where life changes, they offer us these enormous gifts. Yes, it takes a lot of courage, for sure. Yes, it takes a lot of stamina. Yes, it takes a lot of, it takes a lot from us. But they're times of gifts. Change is gifts. We just have to have the capacity to change with it.
That's so beautiful. And it's so timely in what we're all experiencing at the moment. And part of my inspiration behind starting Age of Aquarius is helping others, speaking to different thought leaders and from different spectrums to talk about the Age of Aquarius, global consciousness, remembering everything that's important to as we move forward. Like, I feel like we're at a crossroad and we have a choice. And so I'm just curious, what does the Age of Aquarius mean to you?
I mean, you kind of named it, I mean, when you say crossroads, I hear thresholds. And so the Age of Aquarius to me are these moments where we can keep going or turn, or really the word is return. So, okay. Do you know what a Cairn is? CAIRN, a Cairn on a path. Have you ever heard that word before?
No, I haven't. I've heard the other word on social.
Yeah, I think this is a word from it's an Irish word, I believe. And if you're ever on a path, let's say you're walking in a mountain or in a forest and you see a pile of rocks, that's called a cairn. And they're basically a marker that says, don't keep walking straight. Turn here. The path turns. If you go straight, maybe it's the edge of the mountain, or maybe you'll get lost, or it's basically someone did it before you. Someone actually almost fell off the mountain and they trekked their way back. They built this little pile of rocks, and they're basically giving you a sign that says, don't keep going in that direction. Turn. How interesting is this? That's what a ritual is. It's a cairn on the path. It says, don't keep on going, turn or return here, right? So collectively, you're asking me about the Age of Aquarius. I mean, we are, in some metaphorical sense, driving off of the cliff right now, collectively. I mean, we want to talk about climate change, for instance. We want to talk about war. We want to talk, whatever. We are heading in a very dangerous direction. But we've done that before as humans. Many times we've almost driven off the face of the earth. So there are these pile of rocks that says, don't keep doing the direction you're going. Don't keep going in the direction you're going. Turn here. And we can do that through ritual. Ritual helps us to turn or return. It helps us re-identify what's important. It helps us wake up to where we're heading, and it helps us pivot. There's a phrase that was coined by an ethnographer by the name of Arnold van Gennep. He wrote this amazing book called Rites of Passage. And he coined the phrase pivoting towards the sacred. And that's what rituals do. When we're just kind of veering off path, rituals help us to pivot towards what's sacred and important and meaningful. And collectively, we need to do that. I mean, rituals, they predate religion. Like they've been around a very long time. We have been making meaning with our lives in the world as a human species for a very long time. It is, in a way, a technology. And I'm here for the renaissance of rituals. I'm here because we need it. We need it in the workplace. We need it in our homes. We need it in our bedrooms. We need it in our friendships. We need it in the global, crises and uncertainties. And so the age of Aquarius to me really means a renaissance of ritual and sanity and meaning making. Opportunities to really ask ourselves what's important, what's changing, how can I make this experience more beautiful? How can I make it more meaningful? How can I make it more human? There's no wonder the title of the book is called Hello, Goodbye. That is the doorway we're talking about. To me, the age of Aquarius, it's talking about that doorway. We're leaving something behind. We're entering into something new, right? And so, that's why we're talking right now, is because we're both looking at the same thing. We're leaving, and you talk about the age of Aquarius. So what age are we leaving? Because entering into the age of Aquarius means we're entering into a new age. So we're saying goodbye to something and we're saying hello to something. And that's exactly the name and the purpose of my new book.
It's fascinating. So one of my last questions I have for you, what is your next big event that you have coming up that you can share with us?
Yeah, we are finishing up the first cohort of the Morning Altars teacher training. I mentioned it earlier, we have just amazing people from all over the world who are bringing this ritual and art and nature practice to their communities. And we're launching the second cohort. We're going to put it on sale in May and we launch in June. We already have like hundreds of people on the waiting list. It's really, I can't even believe it. It's remarkable. And it's a 9-month training. And I'm walking people through the 7 steps of this practice, how they can bring it back to their home communities, and even more important, how it can change your life. Because it's for people that want to teach it, but it's also for people that want to practice it. And so that is the thing that's coming up right now, is launching the second cohort of the Morning Altars teacher training, and essentially, really just taking this practice that has changed my life profoundly and teaching it to others so that they can ripple that practice out into the world and help bring more beauty and more meaning through the art of creating earth altars.
Is this all going to be virtual, or will there be some opportunity to come together in person?
The course is virtual. It's virtual, and half of it's on the screen and half of it is you go out into the place that you live. There's a lot of activities out within nature or parks or wherever you live. And then we finish up with a gathering in person. But because, we have people in South Africa and Australia and Germany and Peru, some people can't, they can't afford to fly to one location. So we're doing most of it online with a commitment to getting them off the screen as much as possible, because we are all zoomed out. I do like audio meditations that they listen to as they're walking about, and they're making art outside, or they're bringing the art indoors. And so it's a very innovative course. And then we've had requests that said, we want to gather together and learn, people want to learn from me in person. And so we will be meeting almost like the graduation. The graduation ritual will be in person.
Amazing. How can listeners find out more about your work and the event and order your new book, Hello, Goodbye?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, just a shout out to my Instagram. If you just want a burst of beauty and aliveness, I post a lot of art on there and a lot of teachings. And so my Instagram is Morning Altars, and that's ALTARS, altars. So Instagram, we have a website, morningaltars.com. Also my name.com, dayschildkret.com is ways that you can find out more about me, about my art, about my teachings. If you're interested in the teacher training, it's morningaltars.com/teacher training. And then finally, the new book. I mean, it's the crazy part is it's on back order already, which is blowing my mind. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I think they're going to do a second run in May, but I think that Amazon still has the book. And also on my website, we bought a bunch of copies so that I could do signings for people that want the author's signature. So you can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or my website to still get the book, but it's very limited right now, thankfully. And the second print run comes into the world in a couple months from now.
Well, I will also add all the links to your website in our show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show. This is so timely and so important. I think people really need to hear about your new book, Hello, Goodbye, and also start implementing rituals into their life. And I think we're all at a place right now that we want to remember what's important to us and what we value in life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You just heard the Age of Aquarius podcast with your host, Jacy Nova. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform. Thanks for tuning in.
Age of Aquarius is a cosmic media production and recorded in Los Angeles, California. A special thanks to our producers, Georgie Rutherford and Christopher Lang. To learn more about Age of Aquarius, please visit our website at ageofaquarius.fm. Thanks for listening.